Good morning, and welcome to the Atlantic Council. My name is Kim Donovan, and I am the Director of the Economic Statecraft Initiative within the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomic Center. In the Economic Statecraft Initiative, we maintain the Russia sanctions database and track G7 allies' coordinated efforts to sanction Russia to degrade Putin's ability to fund his war in Ukraine and influence his decision calculus. To date, we are tracking nearly 13,000 designations against Russian individuals and entities as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And last month, in the update to our Russia sanctions database, we started tracking Russia sanctions evasion and highlighted a joint US and UK designation of sanctioned Russian oligarch Usmanov's financial facilitation network. And we even put up an interactive graphic on the Russia sanctions database that you can check out on our website. Today, we will be speaking with US leadership of the task force charged with combating Russian invasion of financial sanctions and export controls. Our goal is to learn more about what the US government is doing, how it's working with foreign partners, and what the private sector should be on the lookout for to identify sanctions evasion and protect against it. It's also very good timing with the G7 meetings later this weekend, where they will be focusing on sanctions evasion and sanctions enforcement. So please join me in welcoming Scott Anderson, Assistant Director for National Security Programs at the US Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security and National Coordinator of the Disruptive Technologies Strike Force. The Strike Force is a joint venture between the US Departments of Commerce and Justice to enforce US laws protecting US advanced technology. Seth Bridge, the Department of the Treasury Coordinator of the Russian Elites, Proxies, and Oligarchs Task Force, or repo. Repo is a multilateral effort to identify, freeze, and seize assets of sanctioned Russians around the world. It aims to shut off opportunities for Russia to evade or circumvent US and partner sanctions. And last but not least, David Lim, the Deputy Director of the US Department of Justice's Task Force Klepto Capture, which is an interagency law enforcement task force dedicated to enforcing US economic sanctions, export restrictions, and economic countermeasures imposed in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. David also serves as DOJ's National Coordinator of the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes.
So Seth, if I could start with you, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the structure of the repo task force and how you're working with foreign partners. And notably, a couple months ago, you came out saying that you froze $58 billion of sanctioned Russian assets.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Shortly after the invasion, Finance and Justice Ministries of the G7 plus Australia came together and formed the repo task force. It's a multilateral effort, and as of March, when we announced it, repo members had frozen over $58 billion in Russian assets. Really, an unthinkable amount, prior to the invasion. I think it really demonstrates the commitment across our jurisdictions. I'll also say that the multilateral support we've received and the cooperation in my career in government is frankly unparalleled, particularly in the sanctions space. So I really, our partners, I have to give them an immense amount of credit. The work of the task force has really run the gamut from operational enforcement cooperation, freezing and seizing luxury real estate, luxury property, to working on legal frameworks to either expand or right-size existing, freezing, seizing frameworks. So, and a lot of that, really, the bedrock of our success so far has been cooperation, coordination, information sharing, and a dialogue with the private sector. So but we're excited about where we're at. Unfortunately, it's necessary given Russia's aggression.
It's pretty impressive how everybody has really come together on this issue. And David, with the klepto capture task force, that's also an interagency body, right? And so I was wondering if you could tell us how you cooperate with repo and the multilateral body.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here, Kim. Seth laid it out perfectly. The cooperation with our foreign partners have been at an all-time high, which has been important for the work of the task force klepto capture, which is effectively the mechanism by which the U.S. government enforces all of the economic sanctions and export controls that have been levied since the 2014 Crimea invasion. And so I think that's important to level set from the beginning. A lot of designations, as you quoted, almost over 10,000 designations across the world since the most recent invasion. But the scope of the task force goes back to 2014. And what you have seen is a robust response, really a whole of government, with Treasury Department, Commerce, the FBI, HSI, and partners we traditionally don't work with in this space who have really stepped up to bring their expertise and their resources to bear. And as a result of that, we have seized, through the task force, over $500 million worth of assets. We've indicted over 24 individuals, both oligarchs as well as those who facilitate and help them to live the lives that they've lavishly lived, and actually have arrested a number of people with the assistance of all of the European partners that Seth and his team have been able to build a framework for better cooperation. And so what we're doing here is nothing new. Export control and economic sanctions enforcement is something that the Department of Justice has done historically for a long time. We're just elevating the level with which we focus on this issue. We're eliminating silos. We're bringing regulators earlier on into the picture so that we can really have a whole of government disruption anytime we identify a target that's for the taking.
And I know that there was recent reporting that about $5.4 million of a sanctioned Russian oligarch's assets were recently transferred to Ukraine through the State Department. That's a novel approach, is it? And I was wondering if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. From the outset, when we were fixated on seizing large-scale assets such as yachts or real property, the goal has always been finding a way to transfer those assets in a lawful manner to the Ukrainian people, right? The road ahead for them for reconstruction is great. There are a significant amount of resources that will be required. And if we can do our little part to help that along, we certainly want to do that. Up until the end of 2022, the legal framework for our ability to do that was quite limited based off on existing law. Congress passed a revision to that, expanding the scope of our ability to send over certain forfeited items based off on specific executive orders, as well as a specific set of crimes. What the $5.4 million shows is the first of what we hope to be many transfers. The Attorney General authorized that early last week, and now it's with the State Department. It'll be, again, the first of hopefully many, not the size that we had hoped, but now we know it works. And as the Deputy Attorney General was on the Hill early last week advocating for the expansion of those laws to include export controls violations that are also a strong focus of the department and the task force as the basis for seizing assets right now.
That's great. So speaking of export controls and also the interagency collaboration themes, I was wondering if I could turn it over to you, Scott, because I know the Commerce and Justice Departments, they just recently launched the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. And it's really fantastic timing considering all of the reports that we're seeing on Russia sourcing Western technologies for military production. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how is Russia managing to get its hands on this technology?
Well, first of all, thank you again for the invitation to come do this. As my colleagues have said, we've really taken a whole government approach on this. The opportunity I've been with BIS for almost 20 years, and I've never seen the international community work together starting from 24 February last year to see the way the global export controls have been levied as one of the many things against Russia in this war. it's been an amazing thing to see from from the investigative point of view, knowing that we have partners and allies overseas that are seeing what we've been saying for many years on this. And yes, the Disruptive Technology Strike Force, yesterday we launched our first set of actual public statements on some investigations, a couple of which were Russian. There was the aircraft parts case and there was another procurement case. Commerce specifically, we've spent a lot of time over the last 18 months really focusing in on how do we assess the threat of the Russian procurement networks and how do we focus on that. One of the things that we've done is working very closely with Treasury and DOJ and HSI and the different entities out there that we normally don't work with on a lot of these kinds of cases, is we're really coming together, and David said it well, the whole government approach. We can't work these investigations on an island. We have to bring in all of our tools from the toolbox, whether it's leveraging DOJ for the prosecution, Treasury for the financial side, and then using some of our own administrative techniques, whether it's a temporary denial order, whether it's the entities list. I think you've seen a large uptick in entities listings since this time last year, and that's that's a really, really good tool that we use in any kind of investigation, but specifically on these networks, because it lets the world know, not just internal U.S. people know. It's, hey, the world now knows that this company is on the U.S. entities list because of a Russian procurement network or an oligarch situation or any of the things that we would come to focus on.
And kind of within that theme too, what are some of the main risks for applying these different types of tools for the U.S. private sector, and what should they really be on the lookout for? So
that's one of the main things that we've done, and it's really fun to do jointly as a group, is to get out there in front of these U.S. companies and in front of these larger groups, specifically like this, so we can kind of educate the U.S. world or the U.S. Industry. The main thing is to understand that what we're asking companies to do is just do your due diligence, do your normal set of diligent checks. If you have a company that wants to buy high technology from you and they don't have a web presence, that might be a red flag. If you have a company that didn't exist before the 24th of February 2022, that might be another pretty big red flag. And what we do is, when we're out there educating, is we're asking the companies to come to us and let us know, whether it's through through the Justice Department. Let your local FBI know, let your local commerce folks know. We have export control officers stationed throughout the world that are out there actively talking with foreign companies too. And I think we're really doing a good job in educating. But the main thing is for companies to understand that they're the experts on their technology, their products, and their business practices. And when something doesn't fit within those, that's something we ought to be looking at.
And can I add on to that?
Of course.
You have here represented the Department of Justice, Commerce, and Treasury. It's not by coincidence that the three of us have released recently a tri-seal set of warnings, outlining some of the red flags that you should be on the lookout for as you're doing your business in a global stage. There's also been the Commerce and FinCEN first ever joint alert that went out last year. I think we're going to see more of those type of things. The goal here, as Scott pointed out, is not to hide the ball, and is asking people to use their common sense, right? When you look at the task force and all of the affidavits that we have filed, they have all been unsealed. And we do that intentionally so that the public can identify the shell companies that are being used, the networks that are being deployed, the MO that they have been relying on in order to facilitate these crimes. We don't want to hide this information from the private sector. We want to empower them. When they take that information and they decide to terminate a client, call in a loan, these are all big wins, and we define them as successes.
That's fantastic. And I know the repo task force has done a lot of trying to alert the public on some of these different issues as well. And I think there was recently published an advisory on different typologies that we're seeing specifically in sanctions evasion. I was wondering if you could discuss some of the red flags you're seeing there.
No, absolutely. That was over the last year. That's been one of the lines of effort of the repo task force, was trying to bring together a truly multilateral sanctions evasion advisory, culminating in that global sanctions evasion advisory, which is available on Treasury's website. Just to be frank with the group, there aren't really any surprises after, and I think, as a longtime sanctions practitioner, sometimes that's a little disappointing, right? You want to find the new stuff, but I think taking a step back, it's really a good news story, right? For those that are in the compliance community listening to this, our message is as of right now, we're not alerting you to anything that you shouldn't be screening for, you shouldn't be looking for already. Some of the common typologies, they're what you would expect, using close associates and family members to obfuscate or hide wealth, transfer funds, the use of real estate, very, very typical typology. Complex ownership structures to avoid identification. Let's see here, use of enablers. The Usmanov recent action is a great example of that, where Treasury designated a trust and corporate service provider, as well as a number of Usmanov financial facilitators, right? These are the typical things we ought to be already looking at, but that's really our message to the private sector is, you know what to look for. We want to be here to help. And to that end, we had a number of recommendations within the Global Sanctions Evasion Advisory. One key one that we want our partners to really focus on, I think it exists here in the United States, although I think we can always be better, but the public-private information sharing. Right? We want members of the private sector to be updating their risk assessments, these types of things. Really straightforward stuff, but we've got it under a multilateral banner, and I think many of our partners are using this in their engagements with not only the private sector, but also third countries as well.
And speaking about third countries, even with the Usmanov sanction that was released last month, I was wondering if you could discuss which are the countries that are the hotspots for Russia sanctions evasion, and with all the different task forces, are we working with them to capacity building to help them identify this activity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the joint FinCEN BIS alert issued last June has a list of several countries that BIS has identified as particularly problematic from an export control standpoint. And I think those are a lot of the same ones that we're still seeing. So we're looking at Central Asia, we're looking at the Caucasus, certain countries in the Middle East as well. These are countries where we're really trying to raise awareness, trying to help lead them to the conclusions that we've reached, right? So a lot of information sharing, a lot of engagements. My commerce colleagues, Treasury leadership, a lot of travel in these regions over the last few months, and I think just to take a step back, the coordination as an interagency standpoint between Commerce, DOJ, and Treasury, I've never seen it this good. It's not to say that coordination's tough, but I've never seen it working this well, and I think everyone's focused on what can we do to help Ukraine on the battlefield right now, and so much of that is in the export control lane, where my commerce colleagues have been phenomenal.
Thank you.
Scott, is there anything you'd like to pick up on that from a commerce side?
Well, from a commerce side, as Seth said, that it's export controls have shown that they're absolutely effective in this space. What you saw starting back in February last year through probably mid-August was almost the entire spigot being turned off, which without creating an embargo or other kind of sanction, global sanctions, we were able to on the commerce control list identify all of the commerce control list items and say no, and a lot of other items associated with those to prevent those going in, but. When there's a will and there's a desire to, rebuild and try to modernize a military, the Russians have still used other lanes of procurement to procure U.S. items. It's, one of the things about being such an amazing global economy is you have lots of opportunities to get items from overseas or from, third parties using, shipping it through multiple places in Central Asia or through the Middle East or through, other locations in the world where it's going to go to 2, 3, or 4 places before it gets there. I mean, there's a real desire to get this kind of technology. And so it's kind of something that, we're, along with the, many hats we each wear, part of our basic duties goes back to, as a special agent, that's my job, is to do these investigations. But commerce and like Seth said, the amazing coordination that we're doing, both internally at the field level and all the way up through the senior executives and the politically appointed people within all 3 departments is it's fun to watch from a government point of view. It really is, because it's not about creating more work, but it's about getting the work done in a much more, I don't want to say simple, but a much more manner of getting from point A to point B quicker.
Impactful too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just very briefly, that's I think what's exciting from a sanctions and from a financial standpoint is that joint, that great example of the FinCEN BIS alert, right? That's the first time FinCEN has ever done a joint alert with the government agency. And we understand that for the compliance community, for financial institutions, this is a new environment, right? But whether it's leveraging BIS expertise to really identify those commodities of concern or leveraging public-private partnerships, the FinCEN exchange, for example, to really try to increase dialogue between financial institutions and the government. What do really simply asking, what do you need? What additional information are you seeing that we can incorporate into advisory documents? It's really, we're in a new frontier in that sense, and I think it's high time we did it. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it is quite amazing to see the new, the public-private partnership and the dialogue that has really come out of these different issues. It's been really impressive, and hopefully is a way forward for future issues. I did want to go back to the G7 and European allies issue that you mentioned before, of just how different legal frameworks are starting to come together. And just wanted to ask you, David, just on how is Europe and G7 allies, how are they approaching the seizing of frozen oligarch assets? I mean, and are they able to put the legal mechanisms in place to do that?
Yeah, so at the very outset, you identified over $50 billion worth of assets that have been frozen by our collective coalition, in large part thanks to the great work that repo and its members have been doing in sharing information to empower each other with that gap of information that one country just needs in order to take action. I think we need to recognize that pre-2022, pre-February of 2022, every country that is a part of this coalition started at a different place with the enforcement of sanctions, right? The United States, this has been more or less something that we have actively enforced on both the criminal and the civil side for years before the most recent invasion. When we look to some of our European partners, there's a lot of assets that have been frozen, not much that have been forfeited, but I don't think the discussion ends there, right? You have a group of countries who have, within 1 year, outpaced, or at least at a minimum have been consistent in designating both entities and individuals with the United States. They have taken steps to make sanction evasion a crime for the first time ever. Yes, we are blessed in the United States to have civil forfeiture authority, or non-conviction based authorities, as some of our European partners know them as. And we've flexed on that, and we're working with them on a daily basis to bring them up to speed to see what they can do within their existing frameworks, identify the gaps, and help to provide solutions of how they can overcome those gaps and fill them in. But a lot of the attention has also been given on these third-party countries that are problematic, as you pointed out. We also need to take a moment to recognize the countries who have really punched above their weight. All of the actions that KleptoCapture have done to date, is in large part dependent on the friendships and the partnerships we've made with these partners. You have countries like Latvia and Estonia, geographically very close to the border of the conflict, making arrests at our request and extraditing those people back to face justice. I mean, that is in itself a success story. You have a smaller country like Fiji, who is willing to stand up to pressure and honors our MLAT request and gives us the right to seize a $400 million Russian oligarch yacht. These are, again, successes that need to be highlighted and showcases the change in the way in which governments are cooperating on this problem set.
I mean, the multilateralism demonstrated here is very impressive. And we only have a few minutes left, so I did have a question for all of you. Just with the G7 summit coming up in Hiroshima tomorrow, the group is expected to tighten sanctions against Russia. And I was wondering if we should anticipate any announcements from the group on sanctions evasion or further export controls on different third countries, or what should we expect out of this? If you can share.
I won't speak for the,
of course,
administration, but I think what you won't find is a loss of enthusiasm and commitment to the cause. It is well into past a year of this unfortunate conflict, and the resolve is only getting stronger. Seth and I were talking yesterday about the ways in which our partners want to expand the scope of areas that we have been cooperating on to date. And so there is a recognition that we've got a newly built framework that works, and we certainly want to push on the gas, not on the brakes on this venture.
I think what David just said, the framework works, and I think that brings enthusiasm to the table when they're having these discussions, and to continue that is the way. That's how we'll move forward on these things. We have something that works, so let's stay with it.
Yeah, from the United States, I think, from the Treasury standpoint, I think you'll see more of the same, a renewed, intense focus on enforcing our sanctions and sanctions evaders. And as Dave said earlier, this is we're not hiding the ball. It's pretty clear from Treasury leadership, from U.S. government leadership, that's going to be the focus for the foreseeable future, and our actions are going to be consistent with that.
That's great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an excellent conversation, and it really is very impressive of what has been able to happen, and how not only collaboration across the interagency, as we've seen, but also with foreign partners on this issue. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.